like to talk quickly about a few ways to improve the peace movement and why a lot of people don't see the cost of war. So, I'd like to ask all of you a question. Where do all human problems come from? Think about all human problems. Where do they all come from? They come from here, right? How people think. And all change comes from changing how people think. And if you look at the whole military-industrial complex, it's built upon a very simple myth. I mean, the war spending, the immense taxation, it's built upon a very simple myth. That's why people put up with it. Any of you guess what that myth is? It's protecting us, exactly. It makes us safe, right? So, yeah, we have vast military spending, but it makes us safe, right? It protects freedom, it protects democracy, it protects your family. And I'm from a conservative background. I grew up in Alabama. I spent my whole adult life in the military up until a year and a half ago. And from the background I'm from, if you talk to people I know about cutting the military budget, they see that as a threat upon their family. So in your mind, you're thinking, well, cut the military budget, help families. But in their mind, look, the military budget keeps us safe. You want to put my family at risk. You want to put democracy at risk. You want to put freedom at risk. So as a movement, we really have to confront the underlying myth. And it's very important we also talk about the cost of war, because the cost of war, everything David just talked about, brings the issue home to people. Right? There's no draft now, and everybody cares about the economy, and this brings it home to people. So we have to confront the myth that war makes us safe, show it makes us less safe, and then we have to bring up the cost and make it real to people. And I've often heard people say, well, how can we go into Afghanistan and Iraq? Didn't we learn anything from Vietnam? How can we go to Afghanistan and Iraq? Didn't we learn anything from Vietnam? But actually, the fact that we went into Afghanistan and Iraq is precisely because our government learned so much from Vietnam. So what did our government learn from the Vietnam War? It learned primarily 4 things. First thing it learned, get rid of the draft. You got a draft going on, people aren't going to want to go to war. What else did they learn?
Not televised.
Not televised things, and that's part of basically, you got to embed journalists in military units. Okay? They learned that from Vietnam. You don't want journalists running around doing reporting, you want them to get the information from the government. Number 3, any of you guess what number 3 is? Close. It's privatize the military. It's got to privatize the military, decreases the number of dead troops, nobody counts dead contractors, and it decreases public opposition to war because there's fewer dead soldiers, and it's very profitable for corporations. And number 4, this idea that if you don't support the troops, if you don't support the war, you don't support the troops. That orchestrated campaign. If you don't support the war, you don't support the troops. So that is how the war machine is adapted. And I don't think that we have adapted in response to what they've done, because so much of the peace movement now is focused on counter-recruiting, but Blackwater loves it when we focus on counter-recruiting, because the smaller the military gets, the more privatized the corporate armies get. And so we have to really confront these things from a very fundamental level, and it's just pretty simple stuff. It's not complicated. War doesn't make us safe, and it actually makes us less safe, and all sorts of evidence supports that. So, the second thing I think we have to do is the peace movement is we have to give people hope. There's a saying in the Army, when I was in the Army, there's a saying that I heard that goes, a human being can survive for a few weeks without food, a few days without water, but only a few moments without hope. And if you lose all hope, you go kill yourself, right? And if you give people hope, that's like giving them food. I mean, people need hope to survive. And that's why President Obama was so successful. And that's why Martin Luther King Jr. was so successful. He gave people hope. And Martin Luther King Jr., he had this ability to talk about something bad and make people feel good. He could talk about racism and segregation, and when he's done talking, you're like, wow, I feel better about myself. I feel better about the world. And I think that we have a tendency to talk about something good like peace and make people feel bad. And I'm not saying that you got to pander to people, right? But we got to show people why there is hope. And I can give you my own personal, I guess, narrative. I never actually talked about this before in any kind of forum, so please bear with me. I never actually talked about this before. But one reason I'm very hopeful is I grew up in Alabama. My parents moved there when I was 2. And I was Korean, half Korean. And it was really awful for me being half Korean. And other kids being white and getting picked on, and I hated it. I absolutely hated it. But my father was half white and half black. And I remember my parents told me when I was in elementary school that I was quarter black, and I just broke down crying. I absolutely broke down crying. And you got to keep in mind, as a kid, when it's horrible being part Korean and you're part black in Alabama, it's really, you know, when you're like 9 or 10 years old, your brain can't really cope with trauma and those kinds of things. And I had a lot of violence in my household, so my brain wasn't really primed for any additional stress. And so I got kicked out of elementary school when I was in 6th grade. I had a lot of behavioral problems. I was abused a lot, so I had a lot of, you know, violent outbursts and things like that. But my parents told me that the reason I was kicked out of elementary school was because I was part black. And so since then, I developed this horrible fear of telling people I was part black. And my father had me when he was 54 years old. My father was born in 1925. So there was like a generation gap. So there was no buffer between me and him. And the only Korean person I was ever around was my mother. The only black person I was around was my father. So even though I was born in 1980, I grew up with an attitude of somebody who lived before civil rights. And what I mean by that is I had this immense just self-hatred. Immense, horrible self-hatred and just absolute rage about my race. And so the first time I ever told anybody I was part black, I was 22 years old and I was an officer in the Army. And before that, I used to actually tell racial jokes so people wouldn't suspect I was part black. I mean, the fear was incredible. And it's really hard to understand why I felt like that, but all the racism my father experienced in the 1930s was put into my brain when I was a kid. So I had that same horrible fear that he had. So I told this guy, he was 22 years old, he was an African-American Army lieutenant like me. And I remember I was real nervous, I told him I was part black. And I thought, I just got to tell somebody. I just got to tell somebody, get it off my chest. And I remember his response, he goes, wow, he goes, my father might actually talk to you now because my father doesn't like people who aren't black. And it was really bizarre for me because in a 1-year time period, I went from having this horrible fear of being part black and being part Asian to having this realization. It's actually kind of cool to be part black and part Asian. It's really bizarre. And I can give you a couple of quick examples. I met this woman in Washington. She's a peace activist. And she told me that she heard President Obama's Nobel Prize speech. David Krieger, the gentleman I work for, calls it the Nobel War speech, the only speech in Nobel history justifying war. So this woman, she's a white woman, and she was horrified when President Obama gave that speech, because she felt that speech diminished Martin Luther King Jr. and Gandhi and dismissed nonviolence. She was very horrified. And she went back to her hotel room crying. And a young white woman and a young African American saw her crying and asked her what's wrong. And she said suddenly she had this realization. She said, who would have imagined 100 years ago, or 50 years ago, she said, who would have imagined 50 years ago that an African American president was being disrespectful toward Martin Luther King Jr.? A white woman's upset about it, and a young black man's comforting the young white woman. That's pretty incredible. And did all of you hear last year President Bush, what he said, the worst day of his presidency? What was the worst day of his presidency? I mean, think about Katrina, September 11th, the Iraq War, right? But he said the worst day of his presidency was when Kanye West said he doesn't like care about black people. So the worst day of his presidency was when Kanye West called him a racist. So that's actually kind of an uplifting idea, because think about it. I mean, think about it. 200 years ago, the idea of being a racist wasn't even a concept. If you told a white person 200 years ago you're a racist, they would have said, well, what does that mean? And you would have said, well, you think you're better than black people. And they said, of course I'm better than black people, I'm white. And the idea of being a sexist 200 years ago wasn't really a concept. I mean, if you called someone a sexist, it was generally accepted. Men are better than women, whites are better than blacks. And the worst thing you can call somebody now is a racist. The worst thing you can call somebody now is a racist. So I want you to hold two opposing ideas in your head at the same time. Do you see how we've come a long way? And do you see how we have a long way to go? So it's like we used to weigh 800 pounds, now we weigh 500 pounds. You know, weighing 500 pounds is better than weighing 800 pounds, we still have a lot more weight to lose. But the fact that we've come so far, why can't we keep going in that direction? So we have a long way to go. I mean, there's still racism out there. I mean, I grew up in Alabama. There's still racism out there, but it's much better than it used to be. So if we've come so far, why can't we keep going? You know, 50 years from now, when people talk about war, why won't people respond the same way when you talk about racism? If we do this the right way. And I think the last point I'll make really quickly, we got to confront the myths of war. Number two, we have to give people hope. And another thing too is our movement needs some sort of spiritual element to it. Every successful movement needs a spiritual element. That doesn't necessarily mean religious, but what I mean by spiritual is you have to give people hope and uplift and meaning and purpose. It doesn't mean you pander to them, but they have to have some sort of uplift or hope or meaning or purpose. And that's a great recruiting mechanism for your movement. If you can give people hope and give people meaning and purpose, it's a great way to get people into the peace movement. So, thanks for listening.